Emancipation is a groundbreaking new film that tells the tale of emancipation in America. This film is sure to change the way we think about this important piece of history. In 1863, Peter and his family were enslaved in a cotton plantation, where he worked for long hours under the hot sun with Codeine and their children. Despite the difficult circumstances, they were a close-knit family who comforted each other and prayed together. One day, however, news spread that Peter had been sold to a new owner. Desperate to spend their last moments together, the entire family gathered around him as he said his goodbye. But before they could finish, there was a loud knock at the door, which soon opened to reveal several white men sent to take Peter away from them. The children's cries of anguish and pleas for mercy only made this situation more heartbreaking for everyone involved. Yet it was when one of the men pointed his gun at Codeine that Peter finally stopped struggling and accepted his fate. Despite this, his captors were still angry at him for fighting back and so brutally beat him before throwing him into the cart meant for slaves. With tears streaming down their faces, Peter's loved ones watched in despair as he was taken away from them forever. Peter had no choice but to leave his crying children behind as he embarked on another long journey of labor. As they arrived at their new workplace, Peter and his fellow slaves were horrified by what they saw. The heads of disobedient slaves lined the entrance, serving as a reminder of the consequences of defiance. Crude cages lined with dirt and straw served as sleeping quarters, and white overseers walked around with whips in hand, ready to punish any who stepped out of line or worked too slowly. To make matters worse, these same overseers would often quote scripture to justify their cruelty, making it seem that God was somehow blessing their tyranny. The conditions at the railroad far exceeded those from the plantations. In addition to the physical brutality inflicted upon them daily, the mental anguish proved just as profound. The constant fear and dread of what may come next caused many slaves to buy into the lie that they deserved such treatment and punishment. They were made to feel powerless, alone, and hopeless. Three emotions that seemed impossible for them to escape from. Despite all this, some slaves still managed to remain strong and determined in spite of everything going against them. Through sheer strength of will, they refused to give up on hope or accept defeat in their fight for freedom and dignity. Peter promised himself that one day he would reunite with his children, a promise kept after many years' hard labor away from home. On the open field, John Fassel, the ruthless boss, would often assign his slaves to perform various tasks. Among those two were specifically chosen as his right-hand men, Harrington and Knowles. Both had been bought as slaves, but Fassel saw something special in them and chose them for their hunting skills. Unfortunately for the other slaves, this only caused more anxiety as they had to witness Peter struggling with his obedience and being reprimanded for even trying to help his friend Gordon when he slipped up. It all came to a head one evening when Fassel ordered that John be thrown into the cage. He writhed in pain from his branding on the cheek, a cruel reminder of what happened if you went against your superior's wishes. His fellow slaves could do nothing but watch in horror at the inhumane way he was treated. It served as a grim warning of what would happen if they became disobedient. Despite these harsh conditions, many of the slaves still tried their best to stay out of trouble and behave accordingly. Some formed friendships with each other, while others vented their frustrations by talking about life before slavery or imagining themselves in places far away from the fields where they were forced to work every day. Despite their sadness and despair, they still found ways to cope with their situation and make the best of it while hoping for an eventual escape or release from captivity someday soon. Tomas, a scared slave, was trembling as Peter attempted to reassure him by reminding him of his family and treating the current situation as just another job. He also tried to offer hope by mentioning God and his protective presence, but John rejected it with a scoff, believing that no deity would be looking out for them. Despite being taken aback at the disrespectful attitude, Peter remained composed and promised to pray for John's well-being. Later on, two white guards were talking about something quite significant. Abraham Lincoln had declared freedom for all enslaved individuals. This news caused an uproar among the slaves, and many of them were running off in a hurry towards Baton Rouge in search of assistance. In this moment of chaos, Peter observed the overwhelming feeling of joy that filled everyone's hearts despite their dire circumstances. People were embracing each other while some were shedding tears of happiness after learning that they could now become free from the shackles of slavery. Fassel's attitude towards Peter changed drastically when he returned to the cage. He declared himself as Peter's God and regarded him as his dog. prompting Peter to demand to be fed the same food as his canine counterpart. The next day, Fassel put Peter in chains and made him kneel in front of him while his dog barked menacingly close by. Knowing that a single bite from the hound would be enough to kill him, Peter remained still, understanding that this was just another way for Fassel to assert his dominance. Fascinated by his courage, yet unable to believe what he was hearing, the other slaves listened carefully as Peter described Lincoln and Baton Rouge, which could be reached after 5 days of traversing the treacherous swamplands. Even though it seemed impossible for them to escape, their spirits were lifted by this distant beacon of hope, and they decided that no matter what happened, they would make a break for freedom one day soon. John, who had been distracted by the explosion on the field, grabbed a shovel and swung it with all his strength, quickly killing one of the guards. The other slaves and deserters saw their chance for freedom and rushed forward, taking down more of the guards along the way. John was able to take advantage of the chaos and managed to steal a knife as well as a gun from one of the guards that had fallen behind. The alarm was raised immediately in response to this attempt of mass escape, with gunshots ringing out across the fields. The runners fled into nearby woods, but not without casualties, both among them and those trying to stop them, including Peter, whom Fassel despised for his daring escape. In spite of this, Harrington, Knowles, and their hounds were dispatched in pursuit, while Fassel continued shooting at those who remained behind until they were all eliminated. The remaining 7 managed to escape, but were soon hunted down and arrested in the nearby town of Prescott. Peter Harrington and his men had managed to track them down through a combination of luck and skill. All 7 prisoners were taken back into custody, with Fassel using his pistol as evidence against them. Peter was later found guilty on multiple charges, including breaking out of prison and stealing weapons from guards. The other 6 were all given lesser sentences, though some of them continued to maintain their innocence despite the evidence presented in court. Despite this setback, Peter Harrington's actions that day have gone down in history as one of the most daring escapes ever attempted within the confines of a prison system. He showed incredible courage and resourcefulness in the face of daunting odds, and his story has been recounted time and again in books, films, and television shows. Peter Harrington is remembered as a symbol of hope for prisoners everywhere who wish to find a way out of their dire situations. His courage in the face of adversity serves to inspire those stuck in unfortunate circumstances, reminding them that freedom is possible even when all seems lost. Perhaps most importantly, however, Peter Harrington's legacy serves as an example of how individuals can take control of their own destinies despite external forces trying to hold them back. He risked it all on one daring escape attempt, a risk that ultimately paid off, proving that each person possesses the power to shape their own fate. Peter, John, and Gordon had a difficult journey ahead of them as they made their way through the treacherous swamp. Peter urged caution, but John was determined to find a faster route. He opted for the horse trail, holding onto the gun he had stolen in case of danger. Gordon followed along with Peter's plan, but he wavered and decided to take his own winding path through the woods after being reminded by Peter of the sound of Lincoln's cannons. As they made their way across, Fassel emerged from between trees at the edge of the swamp. He had been given permission to enter but not leave, and when he tried to turn around, Fassel shot him without hesitation before allowing the nearby crocodiles to feast on his corpse. Despite this gruesome display, Peter, John, and Gordon persevered and managed to make it out safely after desperately searching for a safe passage through the swamp's depths. Peter thought that it would be best if they took no more chances with swamps, instead traveling favored paths on horseback. But John refused to take orders from anyone else and chose his own route instead. Gordon still wanted to stay close alongside Peter as they ventured further into unfamiliar territory. However, in order to evade any potential pursuit they may have encountered, Peter suggested splitting up until they reached a certain destination point. Gordon reluctantly acquiesced and forged his own path towards Lincoln's ever-echoing battle cries, while Peter reminded him yet again of what must be done in order for them all to make it out alive. Afterward, Peter began setting his own course, only to realize that his leg was bleeding as he had been grazed by a bullet. Panic began to set in. He desperately needed to tend to the wound immediately, or else the dogs chasing him would be able to smell it. He had no choice but to keep running and put some distance between him and Fassel. He eventually stumbled upon a house owned by a white family who also kept slaves. Knowing he had little time, he quickly grabbed a vine from the nearby tree and tied it above the wound as a makeshift tourniquet. After this, he proceeded to sneak around cautiously by staying hidden behind a pile of logs. Taking an even bigger risk, Peter carefully crept across the garden until he spotted clothes hanging from on a rope. He made sure not to draw attention to himself as he took one of them before quickly running off into the safety of the forest. Unfortunately for Peter, one of kids from inside the house saw him and rang an alarm bell immediately in alert for everyone within hearing distance, which included Fassel, who came rushing towards their direction after catching wind of it. Desperate for any chance to make his escape successful, Peter ran faster than ever before, only stopping briefly here and there in order to bandage his wound with the shirt that he had stolen moments earlier. Moments later, when Peter felt like it was safe enough, he took off the bloodstained shirt and concealed it inside an old tree trunk, so that if any of Fassel's men came looking for him on foot, they would assume that he had escaped across the swamp instead. All while Peter was actually hiding underneath its murky waterline waiting for them all to pass by. When finally given his opportunity, however, just when Peter thought everything was going all right, a crocodile unexpectedly attacked him. Thinking fast, Peter managed to push it away with all his strength, using nothing more than thick branch before finishing it off with his knife once and for all. Although shaken up from what had happened, Codeine calmed down after waking up with a sense of relief from her nightmare where she saw her husband in danger far away from her reach. With his strength and willpower, Peter managed to get back on his feet and set forth his own course in life. He had made it so far already, but was still weary of the dogs chasing him, as they might be able to smell the wound he sustained earlier. However, with the determination that no words can truly describe, Peter kept running until he could run no more. Finally safe from danger, he looked back at all that had transpired, now understanding just what kind of person he must become if he wanted to survive in this world filled with obstacles and temptations. The kids were visibly worried about their father, but Codeine managed to reassure them that he was alive and that he would be back soon. After all, she said, he had already survived some ordeals that no other man could have endured. As darkness gradually spread over the landscape, Peter took refuge atop a tree and used his knife to remove the swamp leeches from his body, which left a few drops of blood in the plants below. Fassel and his group came across the dead crocodile they had been chasing after, only to find it empty inside. This meant that Peter had managed to escape through it, much to their amazement. Despite Harrington's admiration for Peter's wizardry, Fassel scolded him for it and reminded him of the lesson his father taught him. If you give black people even just a little thing, they will ask for more than what's due from them and take away things like their jobs and land. The next morning saw Peter continuing his journey as he kept himself covered with mud and animal excrement for camouflage. This meant being constantly surrounded by flies, but it was necessary in order to hide his scent from those pursuing him. As he crossed another swampy area, thoughts of his family ran through his mind, wherein he then prayed to God for protection against any wild beast that may cross his path. His prayers were seemingly answered as beams of sunshine suddenly illuminated him as if signifying hope. Taking this as a sign of reassurance, Peter continued onward with newfound courage. Fassel divided up the group in order to cover more ground while searching for Peter when luck shone down upon the fugitive. An abandoned treehouse with clean water and leftover food was found by chance. There were also some hot coals just lying around, which Peter quickly grabbed hold of so that he could cauterize the wound on his leg with it once heated up properly with his knife. Furthermore, after collecting some honey from a beehive by using smoke from the coals placed in an empty bucket as deterrent against the bees, Peter made haste before Fassel could get any closer by seeing its plumes rising into the air in search for freedom. He eventually made it back home to his family, who were relieved and overjoyed at Peter's safe return, despite Codeine having reassured them that he would be found alive. Little did they know of the ordeals he had gone through in order to make it back home, and Harrington was greatly surprised at Peter's crafty escape from the crocodile. While Fassel was amazed by what Peter had achieved, he still reminded everyone of the lesson his father taught him. If you give black people even just a tiny thing, they'll ask for more than what is due from them and take things such as their jobs and land away from them. Though faced with numerous dangers along the way, Peter managed to survive thanks to his quick thinking and resourcefulness. His feat of escaping from his captors was an inspiring one which will be passed on for generations to come, showing what can be accomplished if you never give up hope even in the darkest of times. Despite the danger that surrounded him, Peter's courage and resilience helped carry him through until he finally made it back home safe and sound. In conclusion, the story of Peter is an inspiring tale about a man's heroism in spite of all odds against him, proving that with courage and perseverance, anything is possible. His courageous escape proves that no matter how bleak a situation might seem, we should never lose faith or give up as long as there remains a shred of hope within us. Peter followed the direction of the horses, his knife in hand just in case. As he got closer, he started to identify the smell of burning that grew thicker with each step. When he arrived at the plantation, he saw a scene of complete destruction. Everything was on fire and all the white people were dead. It seemed that the slaves had heard about President Lincoln's announcement and decided to take matters into their own hands. Taking a deep breath to try and steady himself, Peter entered the house cautiously and slowly walked through each room until he found himself standing at the dining table. Without thinking twice, he let go of all caution and immediately began indulging in whatever food and drink was left behind. It had been so long since his last proper meal that his body could hardly believe it. As he ate his fill with an almost desperate hunger, Peter couldn't help but remember John and what had happened earlier that day. How Fassel had forced him out of hiding before shooting him in cold blood just to make an example out of him. He couldn't help but feel immense sorrow for his friend even while knowing there was nothing more he could do than offer a silent prayer for John's soul. Finally regaining his strength from eating, Peter continued onwards, determined to make sure no one else suffered under Harrington or No's tyranny again. He vowed to find them together with Fassel and bring them to justice for their actions against John and so many other people like him who were unjustly treated merely because of their skin color. With the newfound fire in his belly, Peter pressed forward into the night with a heavy heart, but also with renewed strength inside him that would never be extinguished again. He was determined to make sure no one else suffered under Harrington and No's tyranny again. He had made a vow to find them, together with Fassel, and bring them to justice for the injustices they had done not only John, but so many other people who were victimized due to their skin color. With the newfound sense of purpose burning inside him, Peter kept moving forward in the night, his heart heavy yet accompanied by a strength that no one could take away from him. He knew he would get justice in the end. It was just a matter of time before it happened. Though it was a long and hard road ahead of him, Peter had made up his mind. Justice would be served, no matter the cost. He knew he couldn't do it alone, however, so he put out word to any and all who were willing to join him in the fight against Harrington and Knowles. Eventually, they gathered together a large group of people who shared the same mission, to make sure that no one else would ever have to suffer like John did ever again. Together they marched onward until eventually justice was served for John's death and the many other injustices caused by Harrington and Knowles' reign of terror. No amount of words can truly describe the sense of relief everyone felt when the truth finally came to light and their mission was accomplished. The justice that had long been denied to John and so many others was finally served after a long and hard struggle. It was an emotional moment for everyone, but none could deny the sense of triumph and satisfaction they felt in knowing that all their efforts had finally paid off. Peter knew that he couldn't put his own pain aside completely until Harrington and Knowles were brought to justice, but now he could at least start to move forward with his life, safe in the knowledge that nothing would ever bring John back. But perhaps most importantly, Peter learned one very important lesson from this experience. No matter how grim things may seem sometimes, if you have enough courage and determination, you can always fight for what is right and eventually justice will be served. The story of Peter, John, and their struggle for justice is one that has been told over and over again throughout history, a testament to the power of fighting for what you believe in even when all odds are stacked against you. It serves as a reminder to us all that no matter how dark and difficult times may get, we must never give up hope or stop fighting for justice, because only then can we bring about real change in this world. That is the legacy left behind by Peter, John, and so many others like them who have fought bravely and tirelessly throughout time. A legacy that will continue to live on in our hearts forever. Peter doesn't stop running until he hears a strange noise coming from upstairs, and when he follows it, he finds a dying girl trapped underneath a harp that she keeps playing frantically in a desperate plea for help. He immediately rushes to her aid and takes her outside, where he lays her down on a nearby table before trying to fetch some water. The girl is scared though, so she begs him to stay with her as she hands him her cross pendant. Peter understands what she needs, the assurance of God's presence with her. He's so distracted that the sound of Harrington's footsteps doesn't even register in his mind until it's too late. Knowing Harrington has a gun and can easily shoot him if he doesn't move away from the girl, Peter reluctantly drops his knife and steps away from her. Unfortunately, it's too late as the girl dies just moments later and Peter is filled with an intense rage at being unable to save her. With his newfound anger, He turns around violently and uses the cross as a stake to kill Harrington right then and there. Knowles arrives shortly afterwards, but Peter is quick-witted enough to grab Harrington's gun before Knowles gets close enough and shoots him instead. Knowles tries to reason with him by telling him that someone capable of killing a crocodile may be accepted by Fassel in his ranks. However, all Peter has for him are some angry words, calling him the worst kind before leaving Knowles' body behind for good. As the barking of dogs tells them Fassel is about to arrive soon, Peter runs into cover in the nearby cotton fields, but not before shooting one of Fassel's dogs when it gets too close. Fassel eventually finds Harrington's body, which only solidifies his determination to capture Peter at all costs. The next morning, after hours upon hours of running through swamps, forests, and marshes, Peter finally spots freedom on the horizon, ships loaded with Lincoln's army at last approaching with their cannons blasting across the ocean waves like music to his ears. But just as he feels joy rise within him again after days of despairing uncertainty over his future fate, out of nowhere someone grabs him by force and throws him onto the ground. It's Fassel. He offers some meat as payment for begging, but when Peter refuses, yet again Fassel reaches for his weapon, determinedly reminding Peter that he is his god. But just then another gunshot pierces through the air, beating Fassel at his own game. Someone else had shot first. Peter stands up victoriously, lifting up the cross pendant, still clutched tightly in hand, before turning towards who would turn out be Lincoln's native guard, led by Lieutenant Carew. They were here to rescue them all. His body finally giving up from exhaustion and hunger from days spent fleeing through treacherous terrains alone. They quickly take charge, bringing him back to their camp infirmary tent, where an angelic nurse dressed in white tends carefully to his leg wound, infected from hours spent trudging through swampy pathways riddled with danger lurking around every corner. Finally regaining strength over days spent dreaming about what could possibly be waiting ahead for him back home, he inquires of the soldiers if he will be able to return to search his family, but the white soldiers had their own designs on the free slaves. They offer them two choices: work on the federal farms or join army again, refusing to submit and follow orders. Peter is ready to give up until the older soldier reminds him that joining the army could help him rescue his family and gain freedom forever. What prospect await for the Negroes? It wasn't time to think twice. Peter signed up right away with the soldiers of Lincoln's army, leading him into destiny awaiting ahead in Baton Rouge. Afterward, Peter discovers the army has found Gordon too, and he is in a state of great pain, but fortunately still alive. Peter is overjoyed to witness his friend's survival, yet it brings him immense sorrow to have to inform Gordon about John's passing. Then Peter goes to see Carew for his uniform. But before he is able to receive his new attire, Carew inquires if he would be interested in aiding the cause by allowing himself to be photographed. Although hesitant on the matter at first, Peter soon comes to understand that the white photographers are harmless people who merely desire for the world to learn of the cruel reality behind slavery, and agrees to expose the scars from hundreds of whippings on his back for the camera. Afterwards, Peter is taken by General Walker, who asks him about all the knowledge he may possess regarding a railroad that their enemies are constructing. After providing as much information as he can remember or recall, General Walker stares at a picture of Peter with deep contemplation and points out that those scars symbolize disobedience, which isn't something desirable in an army soldier. But before Carew can take away Peter off-site due to this incident, Peter defends himself by stating that these marks prove how many times he had been insulted and beaten yet never stopped fighting, something which should be highly valued in a soldier. When dawn arrives, Carew leads all their troops towards the trenches, where he invigorates them with the profound speech about fighting for freedom. Unfortunately, many soldiers fall due to enemy fire even during their march forward. However, this does not demotivate or discourage anyone present, and they continue battling without hesitation. Soon everyone finds themselves engulfed in flames and chaos everywhere. An explosion hits Peter, leaving him unconscious for some minutes, until suddenly regaining consciousness, he manages somehow drag his sore body through mud while continuing helping his comrades by shooting at enemies anytime possible, while also offering prayers and blessings every time any of his fellow soldiers falls down wounded or dead. Tragically, Carew passes away in battle while searching through debris looking for wounded soldiers. Eventually, Peter locates Gordon, who is injured heavily, which inspires him so much that without thinking twice emerges from cover, running towards enemy lines with only one goal: stopping their cannons no matter what. This heroic action motivates other soldiers into following him, so together they manage overpowering their adversaries, resulting in victory. Once war has ended, military personnel visit each and every plantation, freeing slaves from captivity. When they arrive at where Peter used to work, everybody there is taken aback since they cannot believe news that freedom has finally come true, even though joy soon takes over their emotions, now understanding everything said was real. As soon as seeing former master die abolished by justice itself comes true, Peter starts searching desperately for members of his family, almost reaching breaking point when unable to find them. However, just when beginning praying, under breath, glances aside, noticing God guiding, leading him directly towards wife kids who come running, embrace tightness after such long time apart, while photographers immortalize scene capturing moment permanently within history, which traveled the entire world countless times over. Thanks Lincoln Proclamation, 400,000 black people were able to escape freedom. 1863, likewise 1865, nearly 4 million slaves. America recognized being freed forevermore. Peter's story has inspired many people over the years. His courage, resilience, and spirit of freedom have been used to fight against social injustice and oppression in different parts of the world. He is remembered as a symbol of hope and an example to look up to when confronting difficult times. People around the world will continue kneeling down in admiration towards Peter's portrait, capturing strength, freedom, empowers humanity forevermore. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for other recaps.